Mr. Thank you,
Mr. Believe, Mr. Believe, Mr. Believe, Mr. Support.
Thank.
I believe, support, Mr. Support. I thank.
Mr. Support. I believe, support, Mr. Thank.
Thank you, Mr. Thank, Mr. Support, Mr. Believe, support, Mr.
Thank, Mr. Thank.
Support, thank, support, thank, support, thank.
Thank,
Mr. Believe,
Support, believe,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
believe, I believe.
Mr. Chairman.
thank, Mr. Thank.
Thank Mr. I believe Mr.
Thank, support, believe.
Support.
Thank,
Mr. Support.
Support,
Believe.
support.
Mr. Thank.
I believe.
Thank Mr. Support. Mr. Believe. Support.
Thank, support.
Support. Believe.
I believe.
Thank Mr. Chairman. Mr. Believe.
Thank you, Mr. Thank,
Believe, Mr. Support.
Mr. Thank,
thank,
thank you, Mr. I believe, support, and Mr. Thank you, Mr.
thank,
Thank you, Mr. Believe. Thank
Support.
Mr. Thank you, Mr. Thank.
thank.
I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank Mr. Thank. Support. Believe.
Support.
Believe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Thank. I believe, Mr. Believe,
Support.
Mr. Believe.
Thank, support.
Believe.
Support. Thank,
Thank you, Mr.
support.
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 Thank, Mr. Thank. Believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank, believe.
Believe.
Thank.
Thank.